The first thing I saw that morning was my mailbox laying in the middle of the driveway. Then I looked up and realized half a damn tree was sitting on top of my truck. Not a branch. Not some little storm debris either. I'm talking about a chunk of oak so big it looked like somebody dropped a small building on the hood. And the crazy part is, I'd spent almost a year warning people that tree was going to come down. Nobody listened until it cost them a whole lot more than just a tree. I used to live in this quiet little neighborhood outside Asheville, North Carolina. One of those older blue-collar streets where everybody mostly kept to themselves, but still waved when you drove by. My house wasn't anything fancy, just a one-story ranch with a cracked driveway and a porch swing I never fixed right, but it was mine. I'd spent 12 years paying that place off, working overtime at a machine shop, skipping vacations, driving trucks that should have died years earlier just to keep that roof over my head. Next door sat this rental property owned by a company called Ridgeview Residential. They bought the place during the housing boom and treated it like a vending machine ever since. Tenants came and went every few months, college kids, couples fighting loud enough for the whole block to hear, one guy who tried raising pit bulls in the garage for some reason. But nobody from the company ever actually showed up unless money was involved. Now between my driveway and that rental sat this massive red oak tree. Beautiful tree too, at least at one point. Had to be 60, maybe 70 feet tall. In the summer it shaded half the yard and dropped acorns all over the sidewalk every fall. My dad actually loved that tree. First time he visited after I bought the house, he stood out there drinking coffee and said, "That thing will outlive all of us." Funny how stuff like that sticks in your head later. Anyway, sometime around early March, I noticed the tree looked different. Most people probably wouldn't have caught it, but I'm one of those guys who notices when a picture frame moves half an inch. The lean had gotten worse. Not dramatic enough to scare anybody immediately, but enough that when I backed my truck out in the mornings, I'd catch myself staring up at it through the windshield. At first, I tried convincing myself I was overthinking it. Trees lean sometimes. Wind happens. Rain shifts soil. But then one afternoon after work, I noticed this long split running down part of the trunk, hidden near the side facing the rental house. Bark peeling back, wood underneath darker than it should have been. Wet looking. Sick looking. That's when my gut started bothering me. So I did the normal responsible adult thing and called the number on the rental sign out front. Got bounced through 3 automated menus before some guy named Darren answered. Sounded annoyed right away, like I interrupted lunch or something. Ridgeview Residential. Yeah. Hey man, my name's Luke. I live next door to your property on Hawthorne Lane. I think that oak tree between our houses might be in rough shape. Silence for a second. Then, okay. Not exactly reassuring. I explained the lean, the split trunk, how the roots looked like they were pushing up part of the driveway. Darren hit me with that corporate customer service voice immediately. We'll put in a maintenance request. I remember standing there in my kitchen thinking, maintenance request? Like the tree was a leaking faucet. Still, I thanked him and figured somebody would come take a look. Nobody came. A week passed, then 2. Spring rolled in fully by then. Rain almost every afternoon, and every storm made me more nervous. There's this weird, helpless feeling when you know something bad is probably coming, but nobody else seems to care enough to stop it. Every night, I'd hear branches scraping against each other outside, and find myself peeking through the blinds like an old man. Then one Saturday morning, my neighbor Carla walked over while I was changing oil in my truck. Carla was probably mid-60s, retired schoolteacher, knew everybody's business before they did. She glanced at the tree and went, "That thing doesn't look right." I just laughed and said, "Well, at least I know I'm not crazy." She nodded toward the rental house. "You tell those idiots?" "Twice. And apparently the tree's on a waiting list." That got a laugh out of her, but even she kept staring at it afterward. That's what bothered me most. Once you noticed the lean, you couldn't unsee it. About a month later, I finally got another call from Darren. And that conversation ended up being the moment I realized this wasn't going to be some simple neighbor dispute anymore. It was about to turn into a full-on war between a guy protecting his home and a company that thought they could ignore people forever. Darren called me on a Tuesday while I was halfway through replacing a busted hydraulic line at work. I still remember wiping grease off my hands before answering, because for some stupid reason, I thought maybe the guy was finally going to tell me they handled the tree. Instead, he goes, "Yeah, so we had somebody look at it. They said it's fine." That was it. No explanation. No details. Just fine. I leaned against the tool bench and said, Who exactly is somebody? A landscaping contractor. I actually laughed a little. Couldn't help it. You mean a lawn crew? Long pause. Then he goes, sir, they're qualified. That word qualified, man, companies love that word when they don't want to say certified. I asked if they hired an arborist. He said he'd have to check. I asked if they had anything in writing. He said he'd email me a report. Never happened. Weeks kept rolling by after that, and the tree kept leaning. Summer hit hard that year too, hot enough to make the asphalt soft in the afternoons. Every time I pulled into the driveway, I'd catch myself parking farther away from the oak without even thinking about it. Human instincts are funny like that. Your brain notices danger before your pride does. By July, even the tenants renting next door were talking about the tree. A young couple had moved in, Melissa and Jordan, nice enough kids, maybe late 20s. One evening Jordan caught me taking pictures of the trunk and asked, "That thing supposed to look like that?" I showed him where the bark had started separating near the base. There was fungus growing along one side now too, thick pale clusters pushing out of the wood. Jordan whistled low. Yeah, that ain't good. Turns out he'd already complained to Ridgeview himself because branches kept falling into the backyard whenever it stormed. They told him the same thing they told me. Inspected and safe. That phrase started making my blood pressure rise every time I heard it. Inspected and safe. Inspected and safe. Meanwhile, the tree looked like it was auditioning for a disaster documentary. Then came October. Now when people hear storm, they imagine hurricanes or tornadoes or something biblical. This wasn't that. Honestly, it was barely memorable. Little wind, steady rain overnight, maybe enough thunder to wake the dog once or twice. I actually slept fine. The next morning, though, I walked outside carrying my coffee and immediately froze. You ever have one of those moments where your brain refuses to process what you're looking at? Like reality glitches for a second? That was me standing barefoot on my porch staring at my truck. A massive limb had snapped off the oak and crushed the entire front half like a soda can. Hood folded inward. Windshield completely gone. Roof bent down so hard the steering wheel was barely visible. Coffee hit the driveway before I even realized I dropped the mug. And the silence afterward felt weirdly heavy. No birds. No traffic. Just rainwater dripping off broken wood. I remember walking closer in complete disbelief, thinking maybe, somehow, it wasn't as bad as it looked. It was worse. That truck was a 2008 Silverado my father left me before he passed. Thing had almost 240,000 miles on it and burned oil like a campfire, but I loved that damn truck. My dad taught me how to drive in it. I drove it home after his funeral. I rebuilt half the engine myself during one brutal winter. Seeing it flattened under that tree limb honestly felt personal. And the part that made me sick was knowing this could have been avoided so easily. I took pictures immediately. Called insurance. Then I called Darren. He answered sounding half asleep. I said, "The tree dropped a limb on my truck." Silence. Then, "Okay, was anybody hurt?" "No, but my truck's destroyed." Another pause, and then the sentence that still pisses me off when I think about it. "Well, these things happen." I actually pulled the phone away from my ear because I thought maybe I misheard him. These things happen. Storm damage is considered an act of God, sir. There it was. Corporate absolution. The holy phrase that magically means nobody has to take responsibility for anything. I looked at that crushed truck and said, "I warned you people about this tree for months." He sighed like I was inconveniencing him. "You'll need to go through your insurance." Not "we're sorry." Not "let us help." Just, "sounds like your problem." That call changed something in me. See, before that moment, I still believed this was just laziness. Miscommunication maybe. Typical property management nonsense. But hearing the complete indifference in his voice while I stood in the rain staring at my father's truck buried under their rotten tree, that flipped a switch. I stopped trying to be agreeable after that. Insurance eventually paid out, though getting fair value took weeks of arguing, because apparently sentimental value means absolutely nothing to adjusters. They treated my truck like old scrap metal with tires. But then something interesting happened. My insurance company decided to go after Ridgeview for reimbursement. And suddenly Darren stopped sounding so relaxed. Apparently once lawyers and corporate liability entered the picture, the act of God, defense wasn't holding up too well considering there was already a documented complaint history attached to the property. Funny how records matter once money gets involved. That process dragged on for months. I mostly stayed out of it except for giving statements and forwarding emails. But during all that time, the tree was still standing there, still leaning, still rotting. And every time the wind picked up, I'd feel this knot in my stomach all over again. That's when I decided if nobody else was going to handle it properly, I would. I hired an actual certified arborist named Eli Mercer. Older guy, suspenders, smelled like cedar and black coffee. The kind of man who looked more comfortable in the woods than around people. He showed up one chilly morning carrying this little rubber mallet and barely spoke for the first 10 minutes. He walked circles around the tree, tapping different sections of the trunk, scraping bark back with a pocket knife, checking the soil near the roots. Finally, he stepped back and went, "How long's this thing been leaning?" "About a year." He nodded slowly. "MMHM. Not the sound you want to hear from a tree expert." I asked him straight up, "Is it dangerous?" Eli looked up into the canopy for a long second before answering. "Son, if this tree were in my yard, I wouldn't park a bicycle under it." That sentence hit harder than anything else so far. Then he explained everything in detail. Root decay, internal rot, water intrusion. The lean wasn't old and stable either. It was active, meaning the tree was continuing to shift. According to him, the big limb that crushed my truck probably relieved weight pressure temporarily, which ironically made the rest of the tree even more unpredictable. Before leaving, Eli handed me a full written report with photos attached. At the bottom, one line was underlined twice. Immediate removal strongly recommended due to elevated failure risk. I remember sitting at my kitchen table reading that report over and over while rain tapped lightly against the windows again. And for the first time, this stopped being about property damage. Because my driveway sat maybe 15 feet from my bedroom. If that tree came down fully during the night, it wasn't landing on a truck next time. It was landing on me. That night, I barely slept. Every little creak outside sounded like the tree finally giving up. Wind would hit the siding, and I'd immediately look toward the bedroom window, expecting to see branches coming through the glass. Funny thing is, once somebody qualified tells you something's dangerous, your brain stops treating it like a possibility and starts treating it like a countdown. The next morning, I scanned Eli's report, attached every photo I had, and sent the whole thing certified mail to Ridgeview Residential. Not email. Certified mail. I wanted signatures, paper trails, receipts, the kind of stuff people suddenly care about once courtrooms get involved. 3 days later, Darren called me. Didn't even say hello first. "You hired your own arborist?" "Yep." "Well, that's just one opinion." I actually laughed at that. You know what else was one opinion? The branch that flattened my truck. Silence. Then he goes, "We're arranging our own assessment." And sure enough, about a week later, another truck showed up at the rental property. Guy walked around the tree for maybe 5 minutes, barely looked up, took 2 pictures, then left. Felt less like an inspection and more like somebody checking a box. A few days after that, Darren emailed me a 1-page summary saying the tree appeared generally healthy despite minor age-related stress. I read that line 3 times sitting at my kitchen counter. Generally healthy. The tree literally had mushrooms growing out of the trunk. At that point, I realized something important. They weren't trying to solve the problem. They were trying to survive liability long enough for the problem to become somebody else's. And honestly, that made me angrier than the truck. Because once companies stop seeing people as neighbors and start seeing them as claim numbers, they'll gamble with just about anything. So I stopped dealing with Darren altogether. I contacted the city code enforcement office directly. Now, I didn't go in yelling or acting dramatic. I just brought documentation. Photos, complaint history, insurance reports, Eli's assessment, timeline of every conversation I'd had with Ridgeview. The woman at the front desk looked through the folder and quietly said, "Wow, you came prepared." I told her, "I'm tired of waiting for somebody to get killed before this matters." That got her attention. 2 days later, a city inspector named Marisol came out to the property. Tiny woman. Couldn't have been over 5'2", but she walked around that tree like a drill sergeant inspecting troops. Didn't waste time making conversation either. She tapped the trunk once with her flashlight and immediately frowned. Then she looked at me and asked, "This company knew about this?" "For months." She shook her head slowly. I knew right then Ridgeview was in trouble. Marisol spent maybe 20 minutes documenting everything before posting an orange violation notice directly on the rental property's front door, bright enough to see from the street. Required hazard remediation within 21 days or the city would intervene and bill the property owner directly. I'll be honest, Seeing that notice taped up there felt incredibly satisfying. But the best part came later that afternoon when Darren called me sounding furious for the first time since this whole mess started. "You went to the city?" "Yep. You're making this way more complicated than it needs to be." That line right there almost made me laugh. Complicated? My truck looked like it lost a fight with a dinosaur, and this guy was talking about complicated. I said, "Darren, my vehicle already had a conversation with that tree. The tree won." Dead silence. Then he goes, "We're planning to trim it." Trimming doesn't fix root rot. Our arborist disagrees. "Great," I said, "send me the report." He never did. Of course he never did. Day 20 came and went with absolutely nothing happening. No crews. No equipment. No permits. Nothing. Then came day 21. I woke up around 8 to the sound of chainsaws. I walked outside still wearing sweatpants, and there were 2 city trucks parked in front of the rental house along with a full tree removal crew. Guys in helmets, unloading equipment, feeding ropes through branches, setting up cones across the street. And for the first time in almost a year, I relaxed. One of the workers explained the city authorized emergency partial removal because Ridgeview ignored the violation deadline. Since most of the trunk technically sat on the rental property side, the city crew started cutting from there first. Huge sections came down all morning, and every time another piece hit the ground, it honestly felt like months of stress leaving my body with it. By noon, most of the tree was gone except for the section extending over my property line. So I made one more phone call. A local tree guy named Wayne showed up that afternoon with a stump grinder and 2 workers who looked like they ate nails for breakfast. Wayne climbed out of the truck chewing sunflower seeds and asked, "That the problem, child?" I pointed at the remaining section. He looked at it maybe 3 seconds and went, "Hell, I've seen healthier telephone poles. Best $100 I ever spent. Actually 400. Worth every penny." Within 2 hours, the remaining trunk on my side was cut clean to the ground. By sunset the stump was gone too, shredded into mulch like the thing had never existed. And right on cue, Darren called. Man was furious. "You had no legal right removing that tree." I leaned back in my porch chair and said, "The part on my property? Yeah, turns out I did. You should have waited for authorization." That one made me smile. "Darren, I waited almost a year." He hung up on me after that. Now here's the part one didn't expect. A few weeks later, I checked my mailbox and found an envelope from Ridgeview's insurance carrier. Inside was a check covering the entire cost of my tree removal. No argument. No explanation. No note attached. Just payment, which told me everything I needed to know. Because insurance companies don't hand out money unless somebody behind closed doors realizes they're about to lose a much bigger fight. And the weird thing is, after all of it, after the truck, the arguments, the city complaints, the chainsaws and legal threats, the street actually got quieter. Safer too. No more giant shadow hanging over my driveway every time it rained. Sometimes I still catch myself looking over there out of habit though. Like my brain expects the tree to still be standing. And every now and then, usually when neighbors are outside talking, somebody'll bring the whole thing up and say Ridgeview got screwed over. But other people say they had every chance to prevent it. Honestly, I still don't know which side people will take. So let me ask you this. If somebody ignores repeated warnings until real damage happens, do they deserve sympathy once the consequences finally hit them back? Or do you think I went too far by forcing the city's hand and cutting down the rest myself? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I guarantee people in this neighborhood still argue about it. And if you've ever dealt with nightmare neighbors, shady landlords, or companies that thought they could outwait you until you gave up, hit subscribe. Trust me, this wasn't the last war I ended up in.